Hello world, hello internet, hello people with an unhealthy interest in British politics generally and an interest in pressure groups particularly. Now, first things first, this is part one in a series of two presentations. Part one is yes, part two is no, and you'll find these stashed side by side on my particular page. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is this is complicated. This is a monumentally complicated topic. It's superficially very easy, and perhaps that's why I think they haven't really asked this question that often, because it's something that's come up from time to time. But I think the examiners then decided really this is far too complicated. So why am I spending all of this time on it? For the very simple reason that if you understand this, then there's nothing in pressure groups that's going to scare you. By ranging all the way across this particular subject, hopefully you will be in a position to answer any question that they choose to chuck at you, because this is where it's at, and is the short answer. Third point. Hey, look, we're in Prezi. We've moved away from PowerPoint. I'm working on my PowerPoint addiction. This may or may not help. It is a little old, but we can talk about that when we get there. So let's start. Have pressure groups become more powerful? Yes, we say, because the nature of political participation has changed. People no longer see themselves as belonging to a particular political tribe. And instead, when we go into the poll booth, what we're inclined to ask is, well, what's in this for me? Why do I want to vote this particular way? So we no longer see ourselves as conservatives or indeed as Labour. What we see ourselves as is consumers. This is rational choice. And what this has done is that it's changed the way in which people identify with parties. They no longer see themselves as a member of a political party. Instead, what they see themselves as is a member of a particular pressure group. And we can see that there's been a massive explosion in the number of pressure groups recently, and with that has been a massive slide in the number of registered members of parties. Now, it says here combined current membership is less than 300,000. It's now slightly more than 300,000 thanks to Jeremy Corbyn and his membership drive. So, okay, it's just ticked over 300,000, but it's still an awful lot less than the 4 million registered members of political parties that we saw at the post-war peak between 45 and 50. 1945 and 1950, that is. So we're a huge change in the way in which people engage with politics. People are much more inclined to be a member of a pressure group, or perhaps even a member of several pressure groups. Now, this is just half of the argument. The other half of the argument is countered in the no presentation, which follows. But try to hold these ideas in your head. And complicated, yes, but it's going to help. So let's move on. With the collapse of the ideological divide, with the end, if you will, of the ideological war, and apologies to all of my socialist friends out there, it's over. Capitalism has won. We're all good little capitalists now, and that means that policy is less ideologically driven. So if the question is what do we do, it's less, go back to Mao's little red book as the Shadow Chancellor did yesterday, time check, and more, how is this actually going to work? And this again has created an opportunity for pressure groups to get involved and try to influence policy, to try to change policy. And the best possible example of that is this whole hoo-ha over booze and fags. Now, I say there 12:12 to 12:13. This is still ongoing. It's still ongoing at 12:15. And I strongly urge that you look at my my PowerPoint PowerPoint presentation that accompanies this, booze and fags. Unfortunately, it's banned in some countries, which I think is absolutely hilarious. Unfortunately, it's not because of the contentious nature of the matter I'm discussing, but the fact that I used an Oasis song as the introduction. Anyway, so policy forums. This is what are we going to do now, says the government, because they're not being driven by ideology, but by practicality and indeed popularity. They will go out and they will try to find what people think about a particular issue before they go down that road. And do urge you to look at my presentation on booze and fags for more details. Changing technology. This is, again, absolutely critical. Once upon a time, starting a pressure group was very, very hard. You had to acquire a certain amount of political capital, critical political mass, if you will, either in terms of membership or cash or presence or whatever, before you could get yourself involved in the debate. Now, as soon as you have a website, you're engaged in the debate. And if you can't be asked to create your own website, then you can go to 38 Degrees and basically they'll do it for you. Again, this is really, really important. The ease with which people can now intrude into the public domain. Once upon a time, you needed to be incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy to get your voice across. Now, all you need is some spotty teenager with half an hour in his hands and an internet terminal, and bang, you've got a website. So, the internet has indeed changed the ease with which pressure groups can establish themselves, get themselves out there, and get their point across. Question then becomes, okay, they're getting their point across, but does that necessarily make them more powerful? And throughout all of this particular presentation, that's the question that should be foremost in your brain. Does any of this make pressure groups more likely to change policy? Changes in the media, this I think is also incredibly important, and this has a lot to do with the rolling news network. If you've got rolling news, then you've got 15 minutes between the weather and the sport. You can either fill that with interpretative dance, or you can get somebody to fill the news, fill the space for you, fill that space on the sofa, space in the schedule for you. And the easiest and the cheapest way of doing that is by getting somebody from a pressure group along. And my main example here is the pressure group Republic, which is a very interesting pressure group. And it's basically one man, as far as I can tell, a chap called Graham Smith, at least it was him. And anytime a royal baby is born, you'll have various commentators rolled out from the Daily Mail who'll say how wonderful it is, so you're filling space there. And then you want to get the Republican point across. And you get Graham Smith, and he's a very articulate, very eloquent man, and he'll come and he'll sit on the sofa and he'll talk for as long as you like about how the monarchy is an out-of-date concept, about how it's completely not a waste of public money, and yada, 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 making very, very good points along the way. Last time I checked, we still had a queen, so that may or may not be effective. Anyway, the point is that you can't broadcast empty space. If you've got 24 hours to fill, news doesn't happen 24 hours a day, boys and girls. It certainly doesn't. It happens in fits and starts, and then you've got to plug the space between, or your viewers will switch off. The easiest and the cheapest way to do that is by getting somebody who wants to talk about a subject. That's going to be a pressure group. And so here we've got a huge opportunity for pressure groups to step in and get their point across. If all of that fails and you've got a huge amount of money, then you can retain a professional lobbying company. Nothing new here. These guys have been around for a long time. What we've seen, however, is a massive increase in the opportunity for them to do so. And I think this is essentially a function of the collapse of the ideological divide. If you've got a party that's ideologically driven, then lobbying it isn't going to make a blind bit of difference. However, if you've got a party that really doesn't know what it's doing, is looking for a bit of a steer, then there's an opportunity for you to move in and try to influence them and try to steer them. And we can see that in the way in which these members, these organisations have grown. There were 5 members officially on the professional consultant menu or register in '94. It's now up to 83 now. These figures are a couple of years out of date, so it's going to be even more now. We've seen a huge explosion in the number of professional lobbyists out there. Again, this means much more noise, much more presence, if you will, for your pressure groups. But does it make them any more influential? And again, that is the key question that we have to come back to. And related to that is the rise of pressure points. There are more and more opportunities now for people to try to put the squeeze on government. And we can see that with the rise of judicial review, the arrival of APPGs, all of these things. Very, very interesting way for pressure groups to try to get their points across. Now, I didn't expect that I was going to get through that in 9 minutes, as I seem to have done, and I'm aware that this is really just a sketchy overview of what's going on. What I would urge is that you go back, you think about this, and then we move on to the next presentation. Before we move on to the next presentation, have a look at the fuel protests from 2000. Have a look also at the Stop the War March from 2003. 2003. Have a look at the Disability Equalities Act of 1995. And also have a look at the booze and fags debate from, the ongoing booze and fags debate and look at my presentation on that. Throughout all of this, what you need to distinguish, what you need to try to identify is how can pressure groups change policy? What needs to happen before policy changes? What do you need to be doing if you want to change the government's position on something? What does the government have to want to do if it changes its position on something? Those are big, big, big questions, and they're critical to this particular debate, and we'll look at the other side of this debate in the next presentation. Thanks for your time. I look forward to your questions.